Are you ready?
Well, here we are again.
Are you ready to begin?
Maybe.
I thought you wanted to get on with it.
I thought we were.
Yeah, that means I have to do the intro.
Speak into your microphone, young man. Otherwise, we won't be able to hear you.
Stop being a prick.
No.
Do you mind? Are you ready to begin? Are you actually? For fuck's sake. I'll just fucking begin.
Hello, Internet. I am the Orbiter. Ow! Would you fucking not do that?
You fucking not start without me.
Don't expect me to be in a good mood when you've been hitting me.
Oh no.
Bloody teenagers. Go Team Orbiter.
Mm-hmm. Hello Internet, I am Fireball.
And I am the Orbiter.
I feel like you're slowly descending into madness over the course of the
Trying to, oh fuck, our microphones have got slightly different levels, but never mind.
What?
The microphone levels aren't right.
Jesus. Such a professional.
I must have twiddled the knobs by accident.
That's not like you.
No, it's usually deliberate. Hello.
Are you ready to commence the podcast like a professional?
We already have, haven't we?
Not like professionals, clearly.
I don't know what this is going to be tonight because things and stuff.
That's very helpful. Would you clarify?
The last few podcasts we've started already drunkified a little bit, at least a beer or two in.
You're up to very poorly recently.
Who is?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, a little bit.
You were in a bit of a grump earlier. Not sure if you still are.
I've had shingles. I've had.
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, I'm not sure that completely. I don't know, but it's just things. I've had this cough and cold that you guys have had, but I've got this pain down here as well on my right hand side that Star Stuff thinks might be a kidney infection. But
wonderful.
Hey, for the podcast people who can't see us twisting around and looking suspiciously through the doorway, Dolphin Girl keeps going past the window.
Anyhow, shall we commence with news?
Yeah, I wondered whether or not this whole episode might end up being more kind of a bit of a bollocks report, but with a reference to the subject, because it kind of is relevant to most of the news that's going on.
Okay, so we kind of tackled them half and half together, maybe.
Speaking of which, Bulgaria.
Okay, we'll get onto that. This is episode... What episode is this?
46.
Is it?
Yes.
Rapidly approaching your age.
I think you may have said this before, and it was equally unfunny then.
Just a month to wait. Actually, no.
Before what?
2 weeks to wait, because next episode is our Halloween special.
my bottom just squeaks in anticipation.
Whoa.
Hang on, 2 weeks to wait before what?
Before it actually catches up to your age.
No, it's not.
Podcast-wise, yeah.
When's the next podcast then?
Halloween.
Yeah.
Which
will be episode 47, presumably.
Yeah. And then the week after that, we're doing another podcast, I think.
Yeah, but...
So we're having 3 weeks of them because it's Halloween.
So what date is it now?
This one's going out on the 24th.
Oh, so there'll be like an in-betweeny one.
Yeah.
Ooh, is that a podcast?
Yeah. Well, it's on a Thursday, so.
Oh.
And that will be on Fear, but also given the Brexit deadline, which we'll get onto, because we're actually recording this on Super Saturday, and
well, the current Brexit deadline.
I'm not actually sure.
I don't know, actually. No, is it current?
I'm not entirely sure what's happened so far. I've not really been catching up fully. You have a lot more.
Well,
this story literally came out, the story that we're about to go on to came out a minute before before we actually started recording.
I was going to say, in an hour and 35 minutes, Boris Johnson could be breaking the law.
Yeah.
Again.
So we might actually have breaking news in the middle of the podcast, which will be quite exciting. Also, the one that we do for Halloween might end up being a Brexit special in itself because of the nature of that. But it'll all depend on what happens on the day.
Yeah, I mean, hang on. Will that still be during the school holidays? No, it won't, will it?
No.
Thursday night.
I
was going to say we could actually bridge 11 o'clock with it, and
oh wait, no, it's going out on the 31st, but we actually won't know what's going on because we'll be recording it ahead of time.
There's nothing like confusion, is there?
Yeah, but this one we are recording on interesting day for the news. So you've been keeping up with what Parliament's doing a lot more than I have over
today.
The day. Yeah,
today. Okay, yeah. Well, to be honest, they didn't do nearly as much as people were expecting them to. It turned into a bit of a non-entity of a day, but I haven't really kept tabs since they kind of left, didn't they? They had one vote and then thought, fuck it, we're not going to have any more, and went home.
So basically, due to the Ben Act, they had to have a clear deal negotiated by today, so that it could be voted on by Parliament.
Yeah. Should I do a quick?
If they didn't do that, they'd have to ask for an extension.
Shall I do a quick explanation of what the mechanism that was happening today was, and which is basically how motions go through and amendments are applied?
It's kind of a bit of a complicated legal.
So the government put forward a motion, which is they table the withdrawal agreement that they've made with the EU in this instance, and then the Speaker will decide on what are known as amendments are allowed to be debated. So basically, if there's anyone in the House of Commons that doesn't like the motion that's put forward as it is, they might suggest a change that can be made to it. And that's what happened today. If the House votes that they will accept that change, that amendment will be added to the original motion, and then they'll vote on whether or not to pass it and make it law, or at least pass it onto the House of Lords. But in this case, the Oliver Letwin amendment, which was to, in principle, agree the withdrawal bill, but not to actually sort of legally endorse it until the legal things have been made. So it kind of a provisional agreement.
It had to go through the House of Lords and basically become law, meaning that you'd have to ask for an extension unless you wanted it to be very tight, because it's unusual for a bill of this size to pass in 12 days.
Basically saying yes, we'll agree with we'll pass the motion as presented, but we'll wait until the House has debated all the kind of intricacies of it and made them legal first. So if they could do that before the 31st, then we'd still be moving on the 31st. But we never got as far as the Second Amendment, which would have been a second referendum, which I'm sure hundreds of thousands of people outside were most. Did you see the cheer that went up though when the Letwin bill passed?
But basically that means that, seeing as they were actually put forth as amendments to a bill that never actually got voted on, they didn't really pass. It just means that they didn't actually put the deal forward because it would be different to the actual deal that they made.
So what's happening at the moment is that obviously Parliament have agreed to amend the motion as it was presented today. Government have now decided that they're not going to continue with that motion because it will probably more than likely lead to an extension of the deadline, which
Boris Johnson is vehemently opposed to.
Yeah, I mean, technically by law he's got to ask for it in the next hour and a half, but he said pretty much straight away afterwards that he's not going to negotiate a delay with them.
Yeah,
but basically Monday the Speaker's going to come back because the Tory party are going to potentially put forward the same motion again on Monday, without the amendment.
There's some
or is it
questions as to whether or not they're actually allowed to do that, because there's this rule about not putting the same question to Parliament twice in the same session.
Except that did happen under Theresa May, didn't it? And he stopped it on a third attempt.
Yeah. Well, because then it just gets a bit ridiculous.
Yeah. So, I mean, there is speculation that the Speaker's likely to say they can't put it forward again as it is.
But all of that's kind of up in the air. So this news story, which probably news to both of us, well, not necessarily news in its sort of overview, but some of the details might be. So this is from BBC. Johnson vows to press on despite defeat over deal delay. Sorry. Right.
So basically, Donald Tusk's at the moment waiting for a letter.
That was a tweet less than 2 hours ago, saying that he has to. Yeah, we know he has to ask for an extension by 11 o'clock on the night of the recording.
I wonder what form but in the Ben Act, I wonder what form legally the letter has to take. Like whether it has to be a physical letter, because...
Well, there's a lot of speculating on, whilst he still does have to send a letter, could he send another one saying, oh, just kidding, I don't actually want this, the government doesn't actually want this. But surely people are actually taking note of how they're responding to things in Parliament.
I have heard legal talk about that from experts saying that, that's kind of against the spirit of the law as the Ben Act was kind of... So, if that was taken to court, it would be likely that a judge would say that would not be in keeping with the law as it was intended.
I think he's not really concerned with the spirit of the law. I don't think he's concerned with the law whatsoever.
No, but
as long as he can get around
remembering that while all this is going on, there is the Scottish High Court are waiting to see whether or not he does submit the letter before they decide whether or not they're going to just submit it for him. Or whether they can.
There might be different questions on that, because there were fears that Hungary could potentially veto it anyway, because they were having talks.
Yeah.
Especially seeing as the government not actually sending it and someone else sending it, they might decide, okay, well, that means that we can vote against it because it's not actually what the government wants. But, I mean, that will all be to see in the next few days.
Bearing in mind that probably the vast majority of this episode is going to be a mixture of news and the subject matter. Shall we just, from the get-go, start addressing the subject matter in line with what we're discussing?
Sure.
Because tribalism, obviously, is happening in lots of different overlapping ways at the moment in this situation. Hello. Star Stuff is in the room. You've got, you've got the standard sort of government versus the opposition going on. You've also got Leavers versus Remainers going on.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like quite often people are wanting to present it as more polarized than it actually is, though. The online sphere feels a lot more, I guess, volatile than any in-person reactions that I've seen.
Yeah.
It's only been right at the extremes at actual protests where two sides are actually... Do you mind?
Star Stuff's being mischievous.
Gonna wait so that my point isn't undermined anymore.
We have a disruptive influence in the room.
Are you quite finished?
Civil disobedience is going on.
Forgotten what I was saying. I think. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, but I see online. Well, it depends. Who are you talking about online? Are you talking about general public, or you're actually talking about this ridiculous situation where we've got politics like actually enacted on Twitter?
Well, there is an element of that, but I mean in more like in the replies sort of thing, where people fairly openly condemn people on the other side to death.
Yeah, but the thing with the internet is it can be fairly, what do you call it? Anonymous.
Yeah, I suppose. And then there is also that. I mean, there are times where you can tell that they're almost certainly not joking, but there is that sort of element of you don't always quite know who's being ironic and who's not.
Well, I can't tell what's satire.
Like if someone's saying something stupid about Brexit, quite often I have to check, because a lot of people that are against Brexit have like EU flags in their bio, or
I think the
People's Vote FBP.
The difficulty with it is when it does become a tribal issue and not the issue itself that's happening, because the number of times that I've seen people, it is difficult because you get people like with the climate dispute action that's been going on, people saying about that being disrupted getting to work and stuff like that, which does I can understand their frustrations at that, but it's not making a connection with the reason that the disruption's happening.
It's not actually addressing any of the actual causes of this. And I think people often are reluctant to do that, to actually tackle issues head on. It's much easier to pick on one weak point that doesn't really have much to do with the main spirit of the actual argument.
And there does seem to be an unfortunate tendency to quickly descend into name calling. Which I think as soon as that happens, you kind of lost the argument.
I mean, it does depend, because there are some things in which different people will see as just stating that someone is something as a term of fact very seriously. Calling someone a racist isn't just name calling. If they've actually done something racist, then calling them a racist is just stating the facts there.
Well, see, this is one of the things that it really depends. You're right to a point, but it really depends on what your end goal is, because you're not going to change. In fact, you're going to make somebody like that worse if you call them that. What you could more accurately say is that what they've said is a racist comment. But when you label somebody,
it's not going to make any difference to the actual victims of racism there.
Well, it would if you find a way to communicate with that person that might change the way they are. Because my point is that as soon as you start calling somebody, start labeling someone, they're more likely to go further in that direction because they'll feel under attack. Whereas if you can, in an almost informative way, point out how their comments are racist, rather than calling them a racist, so call their comments racist, there's a difference, because you're not making a direct personal attack then.
I guess I can't remember what we actually addressed this, but I can't remember what subject it would have been. But sort of, you can have different responses depending on you can have an appropriate response to different things. If it's someone that you know quite well that said something out of ignorance, then it would be counterproductive to attack them on that. It would be more productive to educate them on that. However, even still, a lot of people get defensive at that, as I believe you had a podcast on the other day called This Study Shows, is that what it was? And it was talking about how people sort of get stuck in their beliefs. Even scientists, there was a study about doctors washing their hands, saving lives, and they had clear evidence there.
Well, that particular podcast is actually about trying to communicate information to the general public in a way that engages them. You know, there might not be, because science is a very dry subject to some people. But to go back to the point of labelling someone, I mean, I think the difficulty is if you see somebody say something which is clearly racist, and then you call them a racist, that might be the only racist thing they've said that year. But because you've only come across them in that instance, you're then labelling them as a racist, whereas they might not actually have just. They might not, if you point out that what they're saying is an example of racism, they might actually be quite horrified by that, or they might have a chance to explain why they don't believe that it is.
Right.
I suppose it's about giving somebody a chance to modify their behaviour.
I suppose, but there are quite a lot of cases where people just are openly and freely racist and nothing really actually happens to them. And if there's no consequence. I mean, Donald Trump and Piers Morgan are perfect examples of this. They are repeatedly. I mean, I'm not sure Piers Morgan said that much specifically racist stuff. It's just been.
But they're kind of a perfect example of that tribalist kind of response, though, in that if you call them a racist, they will turn the argument around and go on the attack against the PC brigade and demonize the opposing side. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, someone's got to call them out if their words and actions, in the case of politicians.
Yeah, but I think the focus needs to be on calling out what they're saying, not calling them out as people.
Yeah, but at some point, it's like, it doesn't matter. They're pieces of shit as human beings. They are pieces of shit, in my opinion.
Yeah, but as a bystanding listener who's not the object of your anger there, switch off as soon as I hear you say that, because it's an emoted, angry response. It's not thinking logically or rationally. I mean, how do you diminish the power of what they're saying is more important than
the guy's the fucking president, and the other guy's a morning talk show host that has been repeatedly.
But as you've pointed out, there are many people who say the same things. So the economy of your attack is a lot better spent by pointing out how racist what they're saying is, because you're then covering a blanket of all the people that say that thing, rather than just that one person.
I mean, I guess, but you can attack their argument at the same time as attacking them for saying it.
Yeah, I think that if you attack them as a person, you then
at some point it's not going to make a difference.
But it does. It inflames opposition, and it's divisive, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, but like.
It's just going to push them further in that direction.
They shouldn't say that in the first place, so that blame is on them there.
Yeah, but why descend to their level and call them a piece of shit?
Well,
because that makes you just as bad. It
does not. If you're saying me calling Donald Trump a piece of shit makes me as bad as a racist, then that is you'd have to show some sort of actual correlation there, really.
Well, for a start off, it's not actually true. He's a human being, so it's.
Well, he's a disgusting human being. He
disgusts you.
Shit.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think he's got a lot to answer for.
Yeah, but he never will. That's the point. He makes such a volume of vile stuff that it doesn't matter calling his words racist, sort of like, that's not going to do anything.
But there is a lot of opposition all around the world from a lot of people to the kinds of things that he says. So he kind of is answering for it all the time. I mean, if
by
you're
being the president of the most powerful country in the world.
Yeah, but power. I mean, I think all of this is going to change drastically. I mean, I know what you mean, and I get your anger. I just feel that addressing the fault is, to me, I think addressing the fault is more constructive than addressing the person, because it's like labeling a criminal. They're more than just that. I mean, he is a piece of shit. I agree, but I think to call him that implies that that's all he is. And I don't think you can. It's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, yeah, some people will never change. But I can see the worry for me would be that if you openly call him a piece of shit, you're immediately alienating all of his supporters who will never listen to a thing you say then. Whereas if you're less on the attack to him, you might stand a chance of actually swaying some of his supporters with your opinions because you haven't turned them off. Do you know what I mean? Switched them off.
I guess, but I don't think anyone was in the first place going to be convinced by me that ever actually believed in anything Trump says.
Well, we don't have that big an audience, do we? But
unless I know them personally, I guess. Then I
don't know, we've got a few listeners in America. You'd never know, some of our American listeners might be Trump supporters.
I mean, I guess, but I don't know why they'd still be listening.
Maybe they're not now.
It's just sort of...
Or maybe they are, because I'm not...
I feel like it's more dangerous to let that stuff go unchecked and not call it out.
Yeah, but I think it's important the way you call it out, because I think we're talking about tribalism, aren't we? We're talking about... looking at the House of Commons is a perfect example. Yes. It's set up so that opposing sides are facing each other. And, it's no accident that our Houses of Parliament are probably among the most raucous in the world, and that they just literally just shout at each other and jeer at each other and stuff. It's like opposing sides,
That is
rather than working together.
Mainly PMQs. And that's an interesting thing that is quite rare to our Parliament, where the Prime Minister has to respond to questions that he hasn't prepared for.
Oh, right, okay.
They don't get to hear the questions ahead of time. They can be asked impromptu, and they have to actually think of something on the spot and be prepared. And it's, in a way, to take the Prime Minister to account.
It's a bit like Whose Line Is It Anyway for politicians.
I don't know what that is.
It's like a comedian's panel show, but it's all improvised.
Right.
They're all put on the spot one by one to do something that they're not expecting. They're expecting to have to improvise, but they've no idea how or what about at the time.
Right. But that's relatively unusual, and I think that's the main thing that you see them all shouting about. It's only really at PMQs that actually happens. Outside of that, it's actually fairly calm.
Yeah.
Because it is designed to be this adversarial, catching them out sort of thing.
Mm.
I mean, there are some prime ministers that I think are generally a lot more in the spirit of civility, I guess.
It's a difficult one, because I was just thinking about, I have actually thought from time to time how you would actually interact with someone like, say, Boris Johnson or Donald Trump if you met them in a social environment. If you for whatever reason you I don't know, you're catching a train and you end up set opposite each other, or I don't know, you just end up having to speak to them or given the opportunity to speak to them in an informal setting. And it's difficult because I think you do have people in your life that you will only engage with to a certain point because you think that they're just idiots. So I'm going to be nice to them, but I'm not going to kind of... Do you know what I mean?
I mean, I suppose like that on a personal level, if their politics don't really define them so much as a person, other things define them more, then... I mean, with like prime ministers and presidents, politics literally defines their entire presence. So it's kind of difficult not to think of them politically. But if you're just talking about an average person that has views that disagree with you,
well, it is a weird situation because you see them having these debates across the floor in the Houses of Commons, and you see them having quite controversial differences of opinion. And kind of sometimes catch them kind of smirking and smiling at each other while they're putting their point across, or while they're having a bit of a dig or a jibe at someone. Yeah. And it is a bit like, you've done debating club at school, haven't you? You know, there is a certain amount of politics, isn't it? It's, you're arguing a point and you're engaged in debate, but the difficulty, I suppose, with it is that it really affects people's lives.
I mean,
and it's difficult to stomach that when you see it.
There's a very different atmosphere at a debating club, I think, though, because most of the people are there for similar reasons. Most of the people aren't exactly the most social.
Yeah. And
have similar views as young people. So it's unlikely that there's going to be such a level of animosity on that. The most disputed point that I've had at a debating club was nuclear weapons.
Right.
And that simply came down to a matter of the deterrent thing. We all agreed that they're horrible things, but a few people thought they were a necessary evil.
Yeah. See, that, I mean, it's funny you should say that on that subject of nuclear weapons, one of the biggest sort of singles in the 80s that I remember was the Frankie Goes to Hollywood 2 Tribes song. And that was about pretty much America and the USSR and the West against the commies, kind of the Red Scare and all that. And that is an example of global scale tribalism, isn't it?
Yeah. I suppose going to the Red Scare, there you get an interesting case of that sort of name calling, but I suppose more now, not everyone actually agrees that those names are bad things. In some cases, that is a good thing, in my opinion, where the stigmatism around socialism is being lifted, because there's not really anything wrong with the base principles of socialism. It's just that places that have purported to be socialist have executed it very poorly and with many human rights abuses.
Yeah. Do you not think that perhaps there are people on the right, though, who do think that there's something inherently wrong with the idea of socialism?
Oh, definitely. I mean, most people right-wing probably do, to varying degrees.
I suppose that's the big problem with a tribalist kind of situation is, how do you see things from the other side's point of view, and what is the use of doing that? I mean, it's very difficult for us to put ourselves in the position of somebody who does disagree with the principles of socialism because of our standpoint on it.
The most useful thing there would be to examine what series of events lead them to think a certain way, I suppose. Brexit is a perfect example of loads of different people from loads of different backgrounds having different reasons for wanting to vote either for or against Brexit.
Yeah.
Loads of working class people that would normally be quite left wing that kind of voted against what was the side of the left wing, voted for Brexit because they saw it as a vote against the establishment. And a vote for change, and also that there were a bunch of lies that they were told.
But I can't see a way forward into the future without that becoming a more prominent feature of new politics. Is I mean, it sounds very kind of socialist, because I suppose it is, the power to the people kind of thing, people's assemblies and citizens' assemblies, because the political system that our civilization has evolved is not working. It's not functioning. Well, I don't know. It seems to not be functioning or working from our standpoint. Maybe it is functioning perfectly well for the elites.
Well, here's the thing. It's not really going well for either side. So unless you're on the side of being increasingly frustrated with everything going to shit, which, I mean, disaster capitalists may be. A lot of people profit off of, to be honest, fairly few people profit off of the fall of the pound. And a lot of them are the kinds of people that have been funding Brexit.
But then you get situations like what's happening in Chile at the moment in their capital city. Because although they have some of the richest people in the continent, they also have the biggest inequality, and they're having mass riots at the moment that have been going on for days because of a 90 pence increase in train fares. That's what started the demonstrations off, and they've spilled over into riots. And it is that inequality, and the the drop in the value of the currency that's happened, and the rise in energy prices that have happened that have caused it to be supposedly necessary. The people that suffer the most from that are the ones that don't have anything to start with, really. They're living in poverty or on the borderlines of poverty. They notice these changes, and that puts a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on society as a whole, because they are the majority. So that's when you start getting people. That's when you get civil unrest, Well, I guess that's going to get more and more.
This sort of, and I do find it actually quite funny sometimes, this sort of vying over what working class people want and calling out other people for being elite. Now, that means lots of different things to lots of different people. I would say elite is more an indicator of wealth.
That's probably what it's come to mean now, isn't it?
Well, that's what it should mean, but I feel like even though a lot of these people are privately educated anyway, are using this to basically call experts that may have worked hard to actually save up money to go to a university elite just for having a university level education.
Yeah, I mean, as I was saying, to me, the income, the money part is what it's come to be known as. But really, I suppose what I used to think of the word elite as meaning was the best. So to me, the word elite used to mean just the best at what you do.
I suppose, but it's become a lot more.
It doesn't
of
anymore,
a thing to avoid being.
Yeah.
It sort of has this.
Now it's the Davos crowd.
Yeah, but a lot of them simply aren't the best.
No, they just have the most.
Yeah, so it's sort of when a lot of people try and claim that capitalism is a good thing that sort of a meritocratic thing that helps rise the best people to the top. I mean, you don't have to look far to... I mean, Donald Trump's a perfect example of someone who was crap at what they did.
Yeah.
And didn't work very hard for what they have right now.
Well, but the thing is, they very often are. I mean, this head of Thomas Cook, that's had £4 million in bonuses that he's refusing to give back because he says he's worked really hard for it. And it is that how do you get that amount of bonus when you're driving a company into the ground? But I wonder whether or not, I don't know if it's just because I'm taking much more of an interest in it, or if it is just that they are, because of the communications revolution, being outed now, basically. But I'd never heard of Davos until a couple of years ago. And for those who don't know what it is it an annual thing?
I think so.
Where the super rich and super powerful have basically a conference, a big summit meeting, don't they?
Yeah.
And it's, literally it's tens of thousands of pounds a night to stay there.
It's not just like the super rich billionaires, it is also like heads of state, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's a World Economic Forum.
People with power.
In the right hands, could be to use the world's economy to better humanity.
Yeah.
But in the wrong hands, as it is in my opinion now, is just a way of saving their own arses.
Mm.
I mean, you started watching a lot of the stuff produced by Extinction Rebellion.
Yeah, I'm listening to it, yeah.
Which a lot of people see as quite fringe.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, I'd never heard of them until we went on the Striking for Climate Change day.
I heard of them when they were doing things in April.
And I think possibly... Yeah, I'd heard of Reclaim the Streets, which I think was I don't know if they're an affinity group, but I mean, they're not actually a single organisation as such.
No, I mean, that's the thing about quite a few of the more left-wing organisations.
I've never really understood. Is that what grassroots means? When something's not centralised and not organised from a kind of... there's not like a central kind of...
I'm not entirely sure. I thought it more meant that it was like funded more by small donors, that sort of thing, where like passionate individuals rather than one big rich person propping up an organisation. It was more based on if we all band together.
Yeah.
Sort of like small things leading to one big thing, hence grassroots.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. It can be a controversial subject, that whole civil disobedience thing, because it has the potential to disrupt everyone. And, I can understand some people's opposition to having their lives disrupted because, the idea is to... I don't know, I suppose there's lots of different ideas. Some people just want to bring public awareness up, but the main aim of that kind of protest is to make governments and corporations set up and take notice. And there is a lot of research that's been done about those kinds of tactics, if you like. Apparently, it only takes about 1% to 3% of the population to start making governments and corporations have to do something, have to set up and act, kind of thing. But it is a difficult thing. I mean, I know there was the thing with the tube train.
But those were people that were going against what most of the people in the organisation actually wanted.
Yeah. But the thing is, the publicity behind it is not always isn't always clear on that. The people who did that, I mean, Extinction Rebellion as an organisation aren't gonna say to somebody, "No, don't do that." But they did advise that they shouldn't do that it wasn't a good idea, that it might be a bit,
Yeah, it's sort of counterproductive as well, because...
But they are against that whole kind of central rule kind of ethos. It is a community kind of project.
So like any person that's free to leave at any point.
If you want to rebel, you can do it. You have the right to do that as an individual. So
yeah. So it's simply grassroots movements and organisations use collective action from the local level to affect change at local, regional, national or international level.
And I think, really, from what I've seen because obviously I'm interested in what they do and how they do it, but I'm also aware that there are organisations around, and they have been accused by other people of being a cult, which is an interesting kind of...
Yeah, I mean,
I've seen people accusing them of being, saying that it's sad that so many people have been brainwashed. And it's like, well, I can see where people might have that idea, because a lot of it does look really weird, all the kind of chanting and the kind of... But a lot of that is done to keep things non-violent, to keep things calm,
I mean, chants are
you do
fairly staple
matches.
to... Chants are a staple to protest, really.
But I think the thing about it is that there are so many different kinds of people involved in that as a wider organisation, that you're going to get some hippies there, you're going to get some Buddhists there, you're going to get some street performance artists there, but you're also getting doctors, lawyers, teachers, professionals from every level of society. You're getting grandparents, you're getting kids that are coming along with... Well, actually... When I say kids coming along with their parents and their grandparents, I mean little kids, but obviously a lot of this has been energised specifically by the youth, if you like, because they're the ones with the biggest stake in the future of our planet. But it is interesting to see how, in general, this is a tribal kind of thing, in that there are a lot of people taking notice of the scientific facts and treating them as urgent as you would think would be obvious, because the general kind of ethos is that people are following what the governments and that are doing, saying we're going to reduce things gradually and bring it down by this and that, and 2050 is a good realistic kind of goal. But it's like, it doesn't matter what's realistic. What matters is what's happening, because it's not you can't negotiate with nature.
It's not just going to make a few people's lives a bit more difficult. It's going to kill millions.
You can't say, hang on, ice caps, just melt a bit slower, because it's not reasonable to...
I think
to force this on us that quickly.
It's a 1 in 20 chance that it could lead to the extinction of humanity altogether, which, whilst...
That's not very big.
Mostly is okay. I mean, a lot of that area, there's still a lot of damage being done. Yeah, it feels like something that, if there's an extinction possibility there, and there's something that you can do to minimise that, then you should be doing everything in your power to do so.
But the thing is, the people in general, the people that have the most ability to affect change, like in our kind of society, are going to be the ones that, by the time they notice it, there's already going to be billions of people dead and, thousands of species extinct.
I mean, there already are thousands of species extinct.
And the science is showing that even if we went to zero net emissions today, the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere would continue to increase because of the cyclical nature of it. You can't... I mean, I've looked into the options of carbon offsetting, which is paying for projects that take carbon out of the atmosphere that you've been responsible for emitting, and it's a great idea, as long as it's not the only thing that you do. It's going to help, obviously, but it takes time. You plant a tree, it's going to take 20 to 30 years to remove carbon from the atmosphere, by which time,
But at some point, it does reach what I think they call runaway climate change.
Yeah, feedback loops.
Well, basically, as ice in the sea melts, usually the ice reflects quite a bit of the heat actually coming out into space again. But instead it's being absorbed by oceans, which melts more ice, which means that more heat is being absorbed into ocean, which means more fish die.
There's multiple things.
Sea levels rise.
You get acidification of the ocean as well, which affects how much oxygen it can soak up, because the ocean soaks up a lot more than the forests.
You mean carbon?
Yeah, sorry, I meant carbon. Yeah. But the other thing is that as these ice caps are melting, they're releasing pockets of methane that have been trapped down there, concentrated methane that have been trapped down there for a long time, and that's the stuff that's many, many times more harmful than carbon dioxide. So
yeah,
and that's being released in a short space of time. You know, I understand when it does sound quite alarmist to people, and people think that it's a way of that it just makes people lose hope that there's nothing they can do about it. But
it's sort of a thing
kind of
of
is.
Most people actually can't do much about it. There are a few people that can do quite a bit about it, but it isn't good for their shareholders and their
But if you get a million
bank
people,
accounts.
if you get a million people who have two options to affect change, one is to, and they can actually do both of these, but if it was a straight choice between changing their own lifestyles to using less plastics, using less fossil fuels, going net zero carbon emissions, that million people, they're going to be potentially able to be responsible for a lot more change if they turn their efforts to making it impossible for the governments and the corporations who can make massive changes.
Well, that's the point of this,
making them.
That's the point of this disruption. Whilst, going to clean a beach, each starfish that you throw back in the sea and each piece of plastic you pick up, that's going to have a fairly small impact. But for 2 weeks, flooding the streets of major cities, forcing governments to act in ways that make their courts fairly nervous, it puts them in a really difficult position. That means that they have to at least take note of it.
Well, I mean, okay, to get away slightly from that, but to come back to it later, these are. I'm making loose connections with tribalism because the opinions that we're talking about. That you mentioned that podcast about the this study shows thing, and that is about communicating ideas to people, and it doesn't matter from the research. It doesn't matter how true something is. People tend a lot more to go with the people around them or the people that they trust, as opposed to listening to the experts because they're experts. Because humanity is a very social species, and there is safety with going with the crowd,
or going with people that you trust. But a lot of the times that you trust someone, you don't really trust them for something related to anything that's actually being discussed. You just trust them on a general level, because quite often, because they have similar skin color, they come from a similar background, they're the same gender, they're the same age group.
I mean, in terms of protests, I suppose the French really know what they're doing with that, don't they?
Yes, France are quite renowned for civil resistance, I suppose.
Yeah, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but looking at the way they've done it and the results that they've got from it, might, I'm sure people have studied all of that. But I am interested to see where all
I
this
would
is
hope
going.
that they have.
One of the Extinction Rebellion mantras, if you like, is regenerative culture, which obviously there'll be a lot of them that are absolutely knackered now. So they're basically having a rest period now.
What
where
kind of arrest?
Well, not the kind of arrests they've been having over the last couple of weeks, but presumably that's what was happening between April and October this year, because they had the bridge things in April.
Well, it's
so I'm assuming that they're going to come back with something again around about Easter time.
It is quite intensive, and I think a lot of them have been there the whole 2 weeks.
And I would imagine
overnight
it's quite
as well.
I would imagine it is quite a shock to actually come back to everyday life from that. I mean, I've been to Glastonbury for 3 days, and that's a culture shock coming back out of that. You know? And you're not even actually actively doing much there. You're an observer more than anything. But
a lot of them have been literally sleeping on the street or in cells.
Yeah, and probably quite rightly feeling like they're changing the world.
Yeah, it
and
just
then
feels
you
like
got to come back
something-
to you got to come right back down then into normal everyday life and cope with that.
It just feels like something that is too big to ignore, and yet a lot of people still are, and are coming back with really petty arguments. This sort of...
I wonder how much people actually believe it.
I think they genuinely do. It's because they just don't want to think about something that is legitimately an existential threat. Because, understandably, it's not a nice thing to think about. Not many people there actually wanted to have to be there, but they still felt like they did need to be there.
People will believe all sorts of things, and I suppose that the principle behind it being easier to believe something that's more comfortable. Okay, so the climate scientists are warning us about this. The governments and some corporations are saying that they're doing this, that, and the other to try to combat this problem. The two don't match, but it's easier to accept what the governments and corporations are doing as an attempt and to trust them than it is to say, we're terrified the human race could be wiped out.
Yeah.
Not to mention everything else that's going to happen.
I mean, whilst 5% doesn't exactly feel like a great odd there when you're talking about humanity as a whole. No matter what, I mean, we've already seen this. There's going to be a lot of people killed by this.
Well,
and a lot more people displaced.
This is what I mean when I say about we're in an area where it's going to be kind of least obvious for the longest time, unless the jet stream breaks down. Permanently, we're fairly well protected here from it. But if you lived in Japan at the moment, I would imagine it's damn obvious that it's shit going down.
Well, yeah,
or in Grand Bahama, you know.
Well, there's entire countries that are essentially going to go underwater in.
There's lots of places that
the space of a few decades
getting increased desertification and droughts and obviously refugee crises, and these are all symptoms, all the stuff that's going on. And I wonder.
I mean, you say we won't be affected that much, but a lot of Aberdeen's going to get flooded at some point.
Aberdeen, yeah, we're quite high up. I mean, yeah, when I say that, I'm talking in terms of just the floodwater, but there's a lot more to it than that. There's socioeconomic factors that are going to affect everybody.
I mean...
and the worry is that when you start looking at the distinct possibility of a breakdown in society, it becomes really scary when you look at the reality of what that means, because people are capable of...
But the ultra-rich people already know this.
Yeah.
They regularly invite top scientists on how they can survive themselves, even if it means that most of
Well, there was a
civilization
guy-
will perish.
Yeah, there was a guy that was brought into one of the conferences at Davos by a group of, I think it was 5 of the most powerful, richest men in the world, asking about how they keep their security guards loyal around the bunker that they're going to be in once the event happens, which is what they call the breakdown of society. Because obviously paying them in money is not going to be any use to them.
No.
So it is. You could, in some ways, think, well, maybe they're being just as hysterical about it in their own way, but it's difficult to argue with scientific research.
Yeah. Well,
You want to be able to. You want to be able to say this is a doomsday scenario. This is okay. It could happen, but it's highly unlikely. But
that's big. I think a lot of people trying to deny this console themselves with little bits of cherry-picked data that are largely anomalous, that are actually pieces of good news for the world, but it's sort of.
But then when you put it,
that they're detracting.
When you put it in the perspective
argument,
of a species whose, I don't know what the statistics are now, but for the vast majority of our species history, most of us have believed in an afterlife because we can't face the prospect that we're all going to die.
Yeah.
Now, there's no evidence for that.
And suppose for the vast majority of at least what you'd call civilization, rather than just the species history, because
I suppose it's not quite the same.
For most of the species history, we probably didn't think about.
Well, there's no evidence for it. It's kind of a perfect faith thing because there can't be any evidence against it either.
Yeah, no one's lived to see it.
But this is something that there is a lot of evidence for. So it's a lot more difficult to... It's not one of those absence of evidence things that belief is usually based on.
There does seem to be a lot of things nowadays based around denying science, really. And I think it just comes from this series of false correlations with... So, like with flat earthers, for example, a lot of them start off that belief with that the moon landings were faked.
Yeah.
But I rarely actually see people pulling them up on the actual bit of the moon landings being faked. So they start on that and then go, oh, well, NASA can lie about anything. And then they hear about composite imaging where they...
The thing is, I can't take that argument seriously about the moon landings being faked because to me, they're just basically believing the plot of Capricorn 1. I don't know if you've heard of Capricorn 1, the film. That's pretty much essentially exactly what happened in the plot of Capricorn 1, which is a highly entertaining, very dated probably now sci-fi film, but it's...
But there's loads of reasons why they couldn't have been faked. Well, just for example, for anyone having doubt, there were parallel shadows in the original broadcast of the moon landing,
right,
which can only be produced by having a very far away light source.
Right.
Because with ours, if we were standing side by side, they would be at an angle to each other because the light's very close.
Yeah.
So there would have to be...
But the other thing is, I can't...
Doing that outside of a studio.
What do people who believe this think is the benefit of faking them? Why would anyone go to that amount of trouble?
I mean, there's a lot of this sort of assumptions. So they assume that, okay, NASA's lying about the Earth being round now because they do like the things that you do with like a panorama to get a full shot of the Earth, because it's quite difficult to take a photo of the Earth because it's quite expensive to send stuff up there far enough away to get a full shot of it.
Oh, right. They think it's just like a panorama shot.
Well, it is a panorama shot, basically, but they're taking that as meaning that it's been completely fictionally produced.
Right, okay.
So then they assume, it must be flat.
Yeah.
And then, there's a whole bunch of questions there, sort of, okay, how come people have been to Antarctica? And it's not just a giant ice wall. Oh, they didn't exist. Okay, how about... then you get into people believing that Australia doesn't even exist. And then you're just like, what?
I'm thinking to myself now, though, that, like...
viciously cycles
You can take panoramic photos that go round in a circle. If the world was flat, you wouldn't be able to do that. You would be having to move sideways, like 10 miles maybe, to take the next photo.
Well, there's this quote
work.
from... NASA scientist who was involved in taking photos of the Earth, saying that they used composite images because there are certain bits where it doesn't exactly match up, but you can see it. I mean, on Google Maps now they have got maps of other planets and the moon, and they're not quite perfect. There are bits that are different colours to each other and they don't quite match up. It's sort of like a jigsaw puzzle because it's made up of lots of different photos.
Yeah, that's like saying, like, say, because we've got an A4 scanner upstairs. Say I wanted to take a photocopy of an A3 picture. We have a thing where you can stitch two halves together. So the fact that I have to stitch those two halves together doesn't mean that the A3 picture doesn't exist.
But then they get into this presumption from one false assumption, believing that this entire organisation was created to trick people. For what reason, it's not quite certain. Then there's a bunch of this speculation, and that model has
it's not
loads
just
of
for me
problems
about having a valid reason to do that, but it's also about why. I mean, you'd need a lot of people to be involved in the cover.
Yeah, and there would have to be tons of people either keeping their mouths shut or being killed in order to preserve this massive conspiracy that you're not even sure why it's happening. So then you do get into that sort of,
which sounds
I suppose,
more like the
mentality.
fossil fuels kind of issue.
Yeah. But, I mean, there were people back then from those companies that did study the impact of fossil fuels, but their voices were suppressed.
The thing is, as well, I mean, there are two kind of... I suppose there are lots of in-between kind of viewpoints, but you got to think... Who is most likely to be pulling the wool over people's eyes? Who has the most to gain from people not seeing the truth? You know? I think it was... I had one of them memes that I shared. Like, what's more likely that 97% of the world's most skilled scientists are collaborating together to fool everyone into thinking that extinction is a possibility, or
even if it is alarmism, we create cleaner air, cleaner energy. I mean, nicer places to live altogether.
Yeah, I want an electric
just
car.
A nicer world.
The only thing that worries me about electric cars is how quiet they are. But people just have to start looking. I mean, obviously, it doesn't really help blind people, but that they are looking into ways of making electric cars make more noise so you can hear them coming.
Yeah, but, I mean, it's not that hard to produce sound.
But what was I going to say? I was going to say something and my brain just stopped working.
I think it's when you get to these issues where, and I think it is largely due to people reaching out to each other on the internet.
I was going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm getting excited about the whole subject.
Okay. Go ahead.
But these are all aspects of the information revolution, because all of this stuff that it's happening all the time. We saw it a lot with the Extinction Rebellion coverage. That it got very little coverage on the BBC, but we were following it a lot on the direct live streams that were going out.
Yeah,
and there was a lot to see that we weren't seeing. Now that immediately tells me that before access to the internet was so easy, before it was around even, we were just basically told what we were told and fed what we were fed.
Right.
I mean, there's no way that would have even been got organised or come together before the internet.
And I think it's a lot of people that, and I'm sorry, but a lot of them are of your age group because they haven't grown up with this, that aren't aware how to discern information. No, I mean, not everyone of my age group is either, but
No.
on a general level, I feel like my generation's a lot more savvy at discerning information
I would hope
when they
so.
want to.
I don't know. I would hope so. I think it could be a lot better, but there are people of all age groups that really do need to check out, just be aware of the sources of everything and what it means when you share something, when you repost something. It's not just, I mean, it's gossip. If you just share something without thinking about what it's Chinese whispers, you could actually be responsible for a chain letter that goes around the world saying something that's not true that actually affects the future of your species.
Yeah.
So it matters. It's not just, I mean, it matters when you're saying it verbally down the pub, but it's not just that it's that. It's like putting something in print,
But I think it's sort of people, and a lot of these people are just genuinely skeptic people, which I appreciate because, I mean, for quite a while, the established belief has been that there is a God. However, there's no proof of that. So I think a lot of these people do, I mean, a fair amount of them do start with the assumption of there being a God and then use that to try and find that the earth is flat.
I think it's important as well for me, I think a splintering is a good thing in that there does seem to be, when you're looking at it in terms of tribalism, it's a lot easier to keep a conflict going when there's only two sides.
Yeah.
Whereas the more you break down people into different subsets, the more they become a society of...
That's the thing, going back to like calling people racist, there is a complex dynamic going on there with what an appropriate response to that might be.
I think people get their backs up as well when they hear the word racist, because even though it means the same thing, well, it doesn't mean exactly the same thing, but there's the same connotations if you say that somebody's prejudiced, but they might be slightly less insulted by the word prejudiced than the word racist.
I suppose.
Because it's used as more of an insult more often, I suppose. I mean, the word racist itself does take on very different connotations as well. I mean, most people would accept that it's a black-white thing, definitely. But then there's also this kind of nationalistic...
A lot of people have almost... I might have to explain this. Parasocial relationship with prominent politicians, or at least public figures that speak on political issues. Do you know what parasocial?
No.
Basically, it's this feeling of that a celebrity is your friend.
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of people have this because they just watched and listened to their, I suppose, content for such a long time that they feel like they actually know this person, but of course this person is very unlikely.
Did you feel like that when we went to see Dara O'Brien?
In a small extent. I mean, I guess...
Is it that kind of... I mean, even people that you don't necessarily like, is it that kind of... I wonder how I would react socially with them if I had a chance to just have a conversation with them. Yeah. I mean, like, for instance, I was on a video shoot for Muse back on their second album, and found myself in a position where I was being picked up by a friend of mine while they were in the middle of the shoot. So Matt, the lead singer, who's obviously a lot more famous now than he was then, but he was still quite famous then, was just kind of hanging around outside at the same time, and I was just having a chat with him, and it was weird because he seemed like a really nervous he seemed really uncomfortable and really kind of not able to have that kind of relaxed social connection.
Yeah.
Maybe the further you get into that world, the more you're sheltered from real people. I don't know.
But I mean, with that, they do a very tailored performance where they are supposed to be this bigger than life person. But with politicians, that's going on almost all the time. You know, they're followed around by reporters.
Yeah.
Whilst musicians and other kinds of celebrities it's not quite in the same way where they actually care what they're saying. It's more that they're just looking for salacious details.
I wonder if, there's more at risk, I suppose, as a politician, because there are those times when they get caught off guard, when their mic's left on, when they're not, they're not sure that it is.
The fate of a nation kind of hangs in your hands, especially if you're getting up to like right at the top level. You know, Boris Johnson having a phone call with Angela Merkel, parts of that being leaked meant that the pound dropped massively over the course of one phone call.
And that could literally be a matter of life and death to somebody who's on the breadline.
Yeah. I'm going to suggest...
I wouldn't want that kind of responsibility.
I'm going to suggest, because I've run out of beer, that we take a little break.
Okay.
And then we come back and we commence. And we're back.
Yes, we are.
Right, so, seeing as, news has actually developed since we started the podcast, which we have looked at in the interval.
Indeed.
Would you like to summarise?
A photocopy of the letter which the Ben Act required to be sent to the EU has been received by Donald Tusk, but Boris Johnson refused to sign it.
I'm not entirely sure how that works. But,
So technically what he said this morning, or this afternoon, whenever it was, about he's refusing to negotiate an extension with them, and that the law doesn't compel him to do so, I suppose a letter's been sent.
All it requires is for him to send one letter, but it doesn't actually require him to argue the case for the UK getting an extension.
I wonder how he got it there. It said a photocopy's been sent. Presumably, maybe, what did you think? He sort of emailed a PDF to them or something?
I don't know. I don't think it's particularly important.
Well, a photocopy seems like a specific thing, and it's a bit dated, a photocopy. Even
the government's a bit dated, if I'm honest.
Even we don't really photocopy something. We scan it and print it out again.
Yeah, but whatever. They basically sent a copy of the letter, but didn't actually write one themselves.
That's so symbolic, though, isn't it? I couldn't even be asked to type it out. We literally just sent the copy that's in the Ben Act.
I think basically he didn't want to give any impression that he condoned this in any way. He just wanted to say, okay, this is what I'm legally required to do. Here it is.
Did they not say as well? He sent a separate letter.
Sent 3 letters in total, apparently.
Right.
I'm not sure what they contained.
I think I heard something about one of them encouraging them to keep working towards the 31st of October deadline. I didn't know what the third letter meant, though.
Okay.
What the third letter said.
They might have been going through that before we started again.
Who knows? Right.
So, with that, what do you think is going to happen with the EU responding?
Who knows? I don't know.
I don't know. There's really not going to be anyone to argue our corner directly, at least. And, possibly quite the opposite.
I suppose it depends on whether or not
them to vote against
whether or not they see their role as negotiating with Boris Johnson or negotiating with the UK.
I think they see it a lot more as trying to do what's best well, both for the EU, but also
in legal terms, they
less priority, lower down in the list of priorities, but also wanting it to end at least okay for the UK, because that would be good for the EU as well.
But in terms of this particular decision as to whether or not to grant an extension, they would look at it in terms of whether or not the request has been submitted according to the UK's constitution, which we don't have a written constitution, but
we have a.
Is it a legal document according to our laws, the UK law?
Well, it's a legal document according to the Ben Act, which is one of our laws now.
Yeah. Because I did notice that once they'd finished with their things the other day, sorry, I'm cracking my fingers. Once they'd finished with their negotiations the other day and got their agreed withdrawal bill with Boris Johnson, they were straight on to dealing with other issues, which at the moment for them is trying to get Albania and Macedonia into the EU, because they've both applied for membership. So the
North Macedonia.
Is it North Macedonia, is it?
Yeah, they had a whole naming dispute. I don't know if you remember when we were doing the Bollocks report, the Prime...
Yugoslavian Republic of Macedonia.
But it's now just North Macedonia, I think.
Use just Macedonia because the Greeks claimed that was an area of Greece that was famous.
Well, that's what I thought. When I heard the name Macedonia, I thought, is Macedonia not like a part of Greece?
Part of Macedonia, part of what used to be the Macedonian Empire, is in modern day Greece, and part of it is in modern day Macedonia. I imagine part of it's probably in Bulgaria as well, but they're not really piping up about that.
Well, no, probably don't want to be associated with racists.
And you did say that we were going to get onto that with a masterful segue. Whilst I do condemn the racist chants there, this is, by the way, in relation to racism in football.
Yeah, monkey noises from the crowd, wasn't it?
But yeah, against black footballers. To which, quite pleasantly, the English supporters, unusually non-racist, were chanting that you know what you are, you're racist, or something like that, towards the Bulgarian side.
Yeah. So is this tribalism now rising up between racists and non-racists?
I mean, that's an interesting thing. Especially in the case of Scotland, because I did hear, I can't remember who it was, Scottish comedian, I can't remember his name though, Larry Dean, I think. You made a point about England becoming more far right and racist, and in response, in a way, sort of continuing a trend of racism towards English people from Scottish people. Although, to be honest, it doesn't have a huge effect. So it's not like there's really. I mean, I don't. You'll probably have more.
I think I know what you're hinting at is that Scotland, in reaction to England's rising racism, have decided to become more cosmopolitan.
Yeah.
Which. Well, I suppose I don't know, because I don't know if the history of Scottish. It's not. Well, is it racism or is it just nationalism? If you're talking about animosity between Scots and Angles,
it depends how it manifests.
It's tribalism, isn't it? But whether it's racist or nationalist, it's just.
I mean, sometimes it does manifest personally, as you have likely experienced.
Well, it's ridiculous, though. You get like, I mean, on the highest level you get between the West and the Reds, the commune. The West and the East is probably the global scale tribalism, but it goes right down to like Huntley versus Inverurie, and we used to have Wellingborough versus Rushden.
I mean, there is a friendly amount of tribalism, and sports is a great example of this.
Yeah. That can get quite vicious though between different towns.
Definitely, within Glasgow, there's quite a famous rivalry between Rangers and Celtic, which
is that not based on?
Well, it's largely connected to religion in the same way that the fight in Northern Ireland was, where you've got Catholics represented by one side and Protestants represented by the other.
And I know that's where the lines are kind of drawn, and it's just, it seems to me like the two have very little to do with each other than what each nation states is their national religion. Because at the end of the day, nationalism and unionism are only relevant if the state has a religion.
That has been quite
in that instance.
That's been quite an interesting subject, especially since the UK is quite weird in that it still has a monarchy despite claiming to be democratic, where the monarch's religion, I mean, the Queen is the head of the Church of England, which is Protestant, to my knowledge.
See, I find that hilarious. Not that, but I find it hilarious that there's all this anti-European sentiment about taking back sovereignty, and our monarch is German.
Well,
our entire royal family is of German descendants. But then,
but then a lot of people are with lots of different. I mean, they're going back quite a way.
Yeah, Star's just a Viking.
Her husband's from Greece, I think.
What am I? I'm dark-haired. Would I be more Roman?
I did look up the origins of Brill, like etymologically.
I think that was German, wasn't it?
No, it's. I think it originates like sort of around West. You've got a very boring name, to be honest. Last name wise.
What, Brill?
Yeah.
I'm a fish.
Well, no, like where it comes from. I can't remember. It was just like people living in Flatland. It's not anything particularly interesting.
I thought it was people that were really good at what they did. People said that they were brilliant.
The name originates from Wales or Chester. I've discovered 2 places.
15th century of unknown origin. European flatfish that resembles a turbot.
Well, that's something else, but like
excellent, marvellous.
What?
Well,
no, it just comes from brilliant. That's just a shortening of that, but that's not where your last name comes from.
Yeah, it is. When do you mean my last name anyway? It's your last name as well.
Well, yeah, but I mean it's unlikely that it comes from anywhere particularly interesting. I don't know, but anyway,
it's all kind of irrelevant, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, to be honest, it's all based on imaginary lines.
What we're talking about is genetics, really, and nobody, regardless of what your family history might be, nobody's absolutely certain that the genes come from your own family anyway.
No, I mean, with those things like Ancestry.com and 23andMe, a lot of that, although people will claim, that I'm X% this, that's merely actually the chance that you have any genes from there.
Yeah.
My genes are
rather than...
Oh my god. They won't have heard that. You haven't got a microphone. You can't make funny jokes if you haven't got a microphone.
You can redo it then, and then I'll know how.
Star Stuff's genes comes from Tesco. I wouldn't boast about that. They sell everything in plastic.
Anyway, on with, I mean, religion's a perfect example of tribalism, and it had to come up at some point.
See, the Greeks had multiple gods. This is my thing about splintering. You know, if you have 2 of something, it's making it really difficult not to fight. If you've got to be one side or the other. But the Greeks had lots of different gods.
I mean, yeah, but different followers of those gods also fought, the same as true for Hinduism.
Yeah.
If you're a follower of Vishnu and another person's a follower of Ganesh, they don't like each other a great amount. I mean, we don't know a huge amount about Hinduism because...
The Romans were pretty good. They had lots of gods, but when they took over a country, they incorporated the gods and the religion of that country.
They also slaughtered millions,
well,
but...
yeah, they did that, but, they had...
Oh, I really should have got you a mic.
I don't know, you can...
It's all right, it's just that we won't hear it very well.
I think the Mongols were the same, where they let everywhere that they conquered keep their religion and sort of incorporated them into their own culture. But, I mean, that didn't last long once they'd actually finished their main expansion. It broke off into bits anyway. But
Buddhists have kind of got the right idea.
also, Mongols aren't exactly a model of how you want to behave as a civilization, if I'm honest.
That's racist.
Not Mongols.
I said
They did say
Mongols.
Mongols.
What?
You said Mongols.
Well, I'm saying that the Mongolian Empire wasn't a particularly nice...
Does Mongolia still exist, or is it a region now?
It still
Oh my God.
It still exists. Part of it's actually in China, which is a region of China called Inner Mongolia, but Outer Mongolia is a country of its own.
I'm going to go
Yeah,
get
I'm
my...
aware. Right.
I wonder if Outer Mongolia is like a donut.
What?
Well, if you've got an Inner Mongolia and an Outer Mongolia, does it make Outer Mongolia like a donut?
Talking of genes,
Well, it's just sort of inner in relation to China.
you two are very likely descended from Genghis Khan.
Yeah, so is everyone.
Yeah.
Star Stuff just said that we're all descended from Genghis
No,
Khan.
not all.
Most of us.
There's this thing about I mean, mathematically, if you go back far enough, you're likely related. Most people are likely related to someone of great renown.
It's not...
Yeah, but he put it about a bit.
Mathematically, it's not unlikely.
It's not...
'Cause the further back you go,
Yeah.
the bigger you're... It's like that thing where you fold a piece of paper in half and then half again and half again. It soon gets impossible to fold it
But
anymore.
like, most people in the UK are distantly related to, I think, Edward III or something. But that's just an ISO point, I think that's what it's called. But it's not very impressive. It's not really much to do with what we're talking about. But you've obviously got as we mentioned, rivalry between Protestants and Catholics. Then you've also got this rivalry between Abrahamic faiths, which largely actually believe in the same God, but just in different manifestations. And that
See, going
think
back,
different things and whatever.
when you go back, and we really should have got Star Stuff on mic because she's going to be itching to get in on this. Thinking back in tribal history within Britain, you go further. The further back you go, obviously the Vikings came here at some point, but originally, I say originally, you can go further back. But Angles and Saxons were two kind of.
Saxons didn't come along; they were more German.
They were German, were they? Okay.
Angles, which is where we get the name England from,
Yeah.
were around about that area.
So where did they come from?
I mean, they probably migrated from. Over like an ice age, they migrated across the channel whilst there was still ice bridge there.
Ah.
That's also why there's no snakes in Ireland because I mean there's this legend about St. Patrick casting them all out, but actually they just couldn't cross over into Ireland before the ice melted between modern day Britain and Ireland.
Yeah, well, that's going back to the climate thing. We should actually be heading more into. We should be getting cooler at the moment, shouldn't we?
Yeah, I mean,
geologically speaking, we should be. I don't want to get back into that because we'll descend into depression.
With religion, and I found this interesting watching that Gandhi film. Although there is a slightly uncomfortable bit where. Ben Kingsley, who I believe is white, is playing a figure of Indian renown who is brown, which meant that he had to do brown face to do that role, which is quite uncomfortable by today's standard. But I think it was still a very good film. And
yeah, I mean, 1982.
Yeah.
Actually, funnily enough, that film was made the last time that Parliament sat on a Saturday.
Interesting bits of trivia.
Which was when we were about to go to war with Argentina.
Without Falklands.
It was indeed. Bloody Tories again. Making people work on a Saturday.
They're all bloody arseholes. I mean, they probably tried to make people work on a Saturday in many different ways.
Bloody arseholes?
Yeah. Oh. I think most of the last...
excuse me,
famous Tory prime ministers have mostly been famous for
arseholes.
for
Sex
for
with
having
pigs.
shut up, for being adversarial with other countries. Although, to be honest, that's probably true of a lot of prime ministers. We're not a great country. Oh shit.
No, we're not indeed. Yeah, I mean, I had in the past sort of thought about how it must feel to be German and be ashamed of your kind of national history over the past century, but
Yeah,
then you think, well, I'm not exactly proud of my country's record over a lot longer
They've
period.
actually been like very seriously defeated in that way. I don't think Britain has been for quite a while in that way. Whilst our empire did decline, we didn't. It wasn't really such a loss. We didn't have to apologise for anything. We just forgot about it. And
Did we not recently apologise to the Windrush generation?
I'm not sure, but to be honest, that was a mess anyway.
Yeah, it's going to happen again.
Yeah, quite worryingly, the government have neither confirmed nor denied, so this isn't anything certain upon a question of whether they would use basically internment camps for EU citizens in the UK in the case of no deal or even a deal. You're an arsehole.
Sometimes.
Right.
I'm sorry. I publicly apologise.
On religion. I don't. Do you think religion actually has much good that? I mean, this is going more into religion than tribalism, but a lot of the problems in religion is that there is a lot of tribalism from that, and that these holy books have this moral authority above reason.
I just think they thrive on it. I mean, one of the things I did notice in the news the last week, you know, the Chick-fil-A thing that happened in America. They opened a branch in their first branch in the UK recently, and apparently it's already they've already announced that they're going to shut it down after the first 6 months because they're not going to renew the lease because they've had people boycotting it because they support religious organisations they've funded, including the Salvation Army was one of them, that have
also
awful records on homosexual.
Isn't often reported on, supported Ugandan efforts to kill homosexuals, but
I can't say I'm surprised.
no.
I know they have a very bad record on LGBT rights.
But
I used to just think it was...
arseholes make such good chicken, though. KFC as well. Colonel Sanders was a Confederate general.
Was he?
Yeah. Well, Confederate colonel.
Well, I think he's dead now. He's not actually.
Well, yeah, but like, I mean, at least KFC doesn't still, at least directly, support racism in that way.
Mind you, there was a call for, I don't know, when McDonald's first came over here, there was a lot of controversy about whether or not you should eat there because there was, I don't know if it was true, but there was the rumour was put around that a penny in every pound ends up being funding the IRA. Because back then, the IRA was still a thing. The Northern Irish terrorist thing was still going on, and America kind of saw them as a band of freedom fighters.
I mean, a new IRA has surfaced, and in the event of a hard border, they have already said that border facilities would be ideal targets for them.
Yeah. Well, that's possibly why he's decided to put it in the Irish Sea.
I think it was just because
he knows they can't swim.
Well, I think it was because he knew that the EU wouldn't accept any deal that put a hard border in the middle of Ireland.
Where would the checks be, though?
What?
Where would the border checks be? Would they be on the Irish coast? Or?
In the current deal, there are custom checks in the Irish Sea, but only there isn't actually if you can prove that it's not going to go to Ireland or the rest of the EU.
Because there was a thing,
but a lot of people can't prove just like that,
I can't remember.
it's not going to go any
I can't remember all
further.
the steps that it was, but I was telling you earlier on about some football shirt for some club that's near the border, and that during the production of their football shirts, they actually crossed the border 6 times for various reasons, for preparing the materials and stitching and printing and stuff like that. So each time that happened, if it was actually going in and out of the EU, it would be costing. Well, I know the Royal Mail charge, I think it's an £8 handling fee for importing non-EU goods. So
I think specification of being in the customs territory thing was that you have to prove that over 50% of your product comes from, like, the resources used to make it come from within the UK, but a lot of people, even if it maybe is, can't
that was
prove
one of the
that
things.
'cause
Did you see that in the Commons today? One of the Labour MPs was saying, he wouldn't say, I think it was Keir Starmer actually.
Yeah, he was taking quite a few questions.
He was saying that there's a well-known car producer, one of the top 2 in the country.
That's what I'm referring to.
Yeah, that they can't prove.
I mean, a lot of it does come from the EU, but a lot of it comes from non-EU places that they don't necessarily always keep track of because the EU
That's a difficult one for
was
me, is
managing
that a lot of
that.
the argument that's often given for the why the Scots should be supporting Brexit is this whole common fisheries policy thing, and that, just every time I hear that, I just think, well, why? I know it's an important industry to a lot of people, but to me, as soon as I hear about fisheries, I'm thinking, well, let's just stop raping the sea then, because you know.
But I mean, part of the reason that rules were placed there was, well, A, for sustainability, but also B, in the 70s, there was actually a borderline war between the UK and Iceland over fish.
Yeah, fishing trawlers were attacking each other, weren't they?
Ram into each other because they couldn't agree on it, what fish belonged to, because fish don't exactly adhere to borders. Because why would they?
Fish passports.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to define what a British fish is, what a Norwegian fish is, or what a Icelandic.
Well, I've got a passport. I'm a Brill and I've got a passport.
Yeah, whatever, shut up. But
I'm not ignoring you. It's just they can't hear you. So
it's sort of a lot of people made this argument of, we should be controlling our own British fish. It's just sort of like, what defines whether it's a British fish or not? You don't know where it was born.
Yeah.
I mean, unless it's actually in a fish farm on land, then there's nothing really to define that.
Yeah.
Or like inland, I suppose, but not on land, because fish can't survive on land.
No.
I was making a point about religion. Do you think there is any... Do you think basically that religion divides more than it unites?
That's a difficult one.
Yeah.
Religion as a whole?
I mean, yeah, sure.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't think either. I think it does both, but I don't. I mean, I don't know. It's one of those.
By the way, I am talking about organised
evaluation.
religion.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
Religion rather than just.
That's one of those evaluations I would
have.
abdicate from making a decision on, because I think it. Yes, I think it does divide. It unites, but it unites in a divided way. So while it's like, I mean, that's like saying, does football divide or unite? Because it does unite people, but it unites them against others.
Right.
And not that religion is. Maybe they should have like a tournament league of religions, like a knockout tournament. Like a religion World Cup.
What?
You could get them knocking each other out, and then but then you'd still have one left standing at the end, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and there'd probably be even more pricks about it.
I don't know.
And then you got divisions actually within religions. I mean, we're quite familiar with the division between Protestants and Catholics, and then
Thing is,
between polytheistic religions, you got following different gods, but they believe in different gods.
I think it's
in those
used
gods
as a
well.
way to divide people more, because I think all the ways in which it unites people are ways that humans can unite anyway. I mean, in terms of coming together to sing or to meditate, you know, I mean, you had the Extinction Rebellion stuff. You've got people doing the same kind of things in meditation that people do in a religious ceremony.
Yeah,
But it's more in kind of
they don't require,
coming together with nature rather than a god.
They don't require this sort of
But
force that has a personality.
But again, that's more of a unifying cause in that you then get, like, there was a faith bridge, which was, you know, there were people from all different religions coming together and uniting to in one sort of cause, if you like. So yeah, I suppose it depends, really. It depends on the religion. I suppose, like anything, there are going to be ones that are worse than others. And there are going to be subdivisions of them that are worse than others.
I don't know.
In an ethical sense, worse, I mean.
Yeah. I think a lot of it hinges on the interpretation of something that is considered an ultimate authority. So basically, you can't actually argue against the text itself. You had to argue on the basis of what the text actually means. And seeing as that text wasn't necessarily written by someone with the interests of humanity in mind.
But is that not the basis of human existence, though, is basically interpreting? I mean, in that case, you're interpreting a text in different ways. But everything about politics and about life and about being a human is about interpreting your way through life. But I suppose you're free to interpret stuff normally, but if it's assigned to a deity, then
I think when you're like
declared infallible,
when you're bringing forward bills and stuff like that, yeah, they can be repealed, they can be amended. You know, changes can be made there, but I mean, as far as I know, most holy books don't get changed that often.
No, I mean, you get revisions and translations and stuff, and I think.
But all they are really different interpretations of the same thing.
Yeah.
Rather than...
But even in translation, a religion... I mean, there are plenty of things... I don't know examples of them, but I've heard that there are plenty of things that in the Hebrew language that in translation to English they can't literally be literally translated because there aren't words for those things. So, yeah.
They really have to be like retranslated into Greek or Latin and then translated generally, I think. But that's not flawless anyway. So there's a channel called Jubilee. I think it might be a magazine. I'm not sure. But they do various things on the basis of, they say here, we believe in the power of empathy for human good. But they also do general things on trying to get people from different sides of the argument, one of these being middle ground, to find some common ground and agree with each other on some things.
Right.
I mean, it started off with like some fairly, I suppose, facetious questions about, do you like pineapple on pizza? That sort of thing. Trying to find just some sort of common ground. But it got more into just actually focusing purely on the issue.
Looks interesting.
Yeah, so they have various debates. But, I mean, the thing that strikes me with some of these, particularly with some of the top ones, I mean, is that with some of these issues, finding common ground, whilst good for most arguments, in some cases there is just one side that is factually wrong and one side that maybe morally wrong and
Well, see,
harm people.
there's an obvious example of opposing sides there, where you've got the Democrat versus Republican, and then you've got middle ground there. But then you've got the flat earthers versus scientists. I don't think the opposite of a flat earther is a scientist. Because there are plenty of people who know that the Earth is a sphere who wouldn't call themselves scientists.
No, but this is sort of people that are scientists that have some authority on the issue. So that they're not just coming up with people. They're not coming against people that haven't actually researched the topic, but still believe.
So somebody who
the status quo
maybe actually is able to demonstrate.
Yeah.
The fallibility.
But they also have some sort of vested interest in presenting the case for science. Because quite often, when someone's saying that they believe in a flat Earth, that means that they're going against most of recorded science for the last couple of thousand years. Which is a lot to go against.
Yeah.
Without any sort of blow-by-blow on how you actually explain all these phenomena that have been observed over the last couple of years.
And again, for me, one of the crucial points that I stumble over is why. I mean, flat earthers' arguments, I can follow the logic that they're going through, and I can understand sometimes the whole conspiracy theory kind of suspicion and stuff like that, but there always, to me, has to be some kind of justification for it. It's like, who would benefit from fooling,
I guess, but
everyone? You know?
On a wider point, especially here, one of the most popular videos is pro-vaccine versus anti-vaccine, particularly on the question of vaccinating children. When you don't vaccinate children, and this is scientific fact, it poses a risk to those around them that can't get vaccinated, not to mention the child themselves not being able to
apparently
be immune.
And this was in one of the earlier episodes of that. This study shows things with the pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine argument. It's more constructive. Obviously, it doesn't work all the time, but it's 3 times more successful if, when approaching an anti-vaxxer, if you approach it in terms of trying to convince them that there's no link with autism, it's 3 times more successful if, rather than that approach, you take the approach of just telling them or trying to convince them how much it can prevent measles, say, because an anti-vaxxer, although they may be wrong about their assumptions, their aim is the same. They want to protect their child, even though it's false information they're using to do that. So if you don't take them head on with the argument that they're using, they believe that they're protecting their child against a risk of autism by not vaccinating. But if you tackle them on a different issue, like whether or not they're going to be at risk of getting measles, you're 3 times more likely to actually get them to vaccinate their child, even if they still think that autism is a risk.
Right.
Because you're not confronting them with something that you know to be false. Because you kind of... It's almost like it's like that thing calling somebody a racist. You're basically calling them an idiot. You're calling them out on believing something that's not true, which people can get quite defensive about.
Yeah, I mean, there is a question on... I suppose there is a question on... I mean, especially when your goals are the same thing, I suppose you can come to an understanding where you do just want to do the most constructive thing there, trying to use not necessarily the most airtight arguments or disprove them in any way or debunk what they're saying, but more just trying to come to a conclusion that actually achieves what you want to achieve there.
Yeah. So it's always difficult though when you've got a suspicion. There's always got to be trust involved, because if somebody can try to convince you that they just want what's best for society, at the end of the day, you've still got to trust that they're not actually just wanting to make the most profit out of exploiting that society.
I mean, I guess with this, most of the people on here are average, everyday people that believe these things. They're not like the top of their... They're not at the top of their group of people.
No.
Like, you don't have, in the Democrats and Republican argument, you don't have representatives that are actually politicians there. You just have voters there.
Indeed.
But I suppose, can it be dangerous to normalise the other side in an argument? Like saying...
Depends who you're talking to, doesn't it?
Recently it was, not that recently, but when last year or so, debated on Question Time, on the basis of protests that have been going on outside Birmingham, whether it's appropriate to teach children about homosexual relationships. At that level, I mean, that is literally teaching kids about the existence of gay people.
Yeah.
Which a lot of kids don't get from outside school, really.
Yeah.
Especially the kids of parents that would be protesting that. Is it okay to even debate stuff like that, where you are literally teaching people about the existence of these people?
Well, is
it okay to bring that up as a point of discussion?
I don't think you actually don't know my answer to that, do you?
Well, explain it.
Explain why I think that it's okay to teach people about the way the world is.
No, but is it okay to debate whether that is an appropriate thing?
If somebody disagrees with it, then it has to be debated. I don't think it necessarily means that debate has to have any influence. But if somebody doesn't think that it's the right thing to do, then...
Like a televised debate.
All right. Well...
Represented to the public as an issue where
as with anything, it should possibly be represented in a way that is representative of the balance in society. So if 10 people think that it's okay and one person doesn't, then have that balance of debaters.
Okay, but what if those people aren't relevant to the actual discussion? What if they're not educators and they're just average everyday people that don't actually know what the fuck they're talking about?
Well, I think if you're trying to provoke debate and pit sides against each other, then I suppose that is the essence of trying to promote tribalism, isn't it? Because you're trying to divide, you're trying to pit people against each other with opposing views.
Is it an okay question for Question Time to ask? Because although often that does divide, it's not necessarily in the spirit of the actual programme itself. They're trying to find some sort of, I suppose, consensus on an issue.
Well, I would be against censorship of any kind, really. So I couldn't say no, it's not okay to ask that question, because I don't think it's right to stop people asking any questions.
But would you say that the regular representation of the climate change debate as a 50-50 thing, where they have one person from one side, one person from the other, rather than fully representative of the scientific community on the issue, where you would have 24 people on one side and one on the other?
No, but I'm not sure I would think that what you were talking about with the Question Time issue was a regular representation if it's a one-off programme.
Okay, but similar issues do get raised on debating gay rights, or, for example...
it might be a result of my echo chamber bubble, but I would think that I get the impression that most people have a fairly acceptable view of... I would think most people would say, yes, it's obviously okay to teach people about the way the world is. But there are unfortunately people who disagree with that because they think you're influencing the world by doing that.
Okay.
And those are the people whose minds need to be changed.
Now, a much more
There are ways of
contentious
doing that.
issue, rather than just gay rights, wider is transgender rights. Is it okay to teach children?
Why is
about
that much more
transgender
contentious?
Ask people. A lot more people are more accepting of gay people than trans people, just from polls.
Yeah, I suppose contentious is an observation rather than a...
Well, it's a measurement of public opinion.
Yeah, that's what measuring something is, observing it.
I suppose, but it's not a baseless observation. On issues where...
I think it probably needs more discussion then, if there is more of an even...
But should it be represented as something where, it's up in the air, there's room to discuss it, or should it be represented more as we need to convince people of what is right here, what actually helps
I don't think
people?
it's useful to present it as that, even though that's the case, because I think it from the starting point, it alienates the people you're trying to convince. I think it's unfortunate, but I think it's a necessity to approach some subjects in a way that is more likely to sway opinions which need to be swayed. Some people will never be swayed, but there are many who will react by becoming more entrenched if they think from the outset that you're trying to change their mind.
Okay, but is it appropriate to represent issues on which people could literally die over as something that's up for debate?
I don't think it's useful to shut debate down. I think it's an urgent thing that needs to be debated because it needs to be there needs to be some kind of resolution reached. I think if everybody agreed that it was wrong, then there would be no debate happening. But the fact that some people, preferably the longer time goes on, more people are convinced by the arguments that it is okay. And the more people realise that it is okay, it's a bit like the public awareness thing with the Extinction Rebellion thing. It's like the more people see of people arguing for something.
I suppose, but should you give the people that don't think it's okay a voice publicly?
I don't know that I have the right to take away someone's voice. Everybody has a public voice.
Okay, everyone has a public voice, but not everyone gets to go on television to air that public voice.
No.
Everyone, I mean, most people can air their opinion to people in their personal life, but that reach is going to be fairly limited.
I think it has to be, people just have to take their own. I mean, we can decide who we have on our podcast. That's the level of responsibility we've got, and we probably do to a certain extent.
Okay, but I mean, surely we're allowed to pass opinion on what, like, the BBC should do in regards to who it invites on its programs. I mean, we obviously don't know the ins and outs of how it actually gets people on the program, but the types of people it should get on programs.
I don't know. I feel very uncomfortable making any judgments on that kind of thing because
is that because you don't know that your views are
because I don't want to be a bigot.
Right ones?
I don't want to be as bad as the other side. I don't want to say to someone, no, you can't have a voice because what you're talking about is bullshit and you're an idiot. Because I think that's destructive and divisive. I think if somebody is talking bullshit and they are an idiot, I think allowing them to demonstrate that is actually counterproductive to them. As long as you're there to, as long as you can counter what they're saying,
yeah, I suppose
with sense,
being able to
if they were the only ones on the program, they shouldn't be allowed to be given. They shouldn't be given a public voice. But if you put somebody with an unreasonable opinion on screen with somebody who has a reasonable opinion and they debate with each other, I would hope the person with the reasonable opinion will come out looking better.
Yeah.
So, in that sense, I think it should be allowed, but within boundaries. Obviously, the more extreme and unreasonable opinion,
but like,
the less I would be comfortable with them having a.
At least on British television, you very rarely see someone that you would call a white supremacist, that you would reasonably call a white supremacist, airing their views.
Well, no, because there would be laws against that. You know, there would be complaints. The public would have that program pulled. You know, because our system is set up to.
So shouldn't there be a similar system set up around gay rights?
Well, there is. I mean, if that
is
kind
it
of
effective though, or
I don't know because
rights?
I don't know if there is offence caused and the Broadcasting Complaints Commission receive those complaints and act on them, then that's how our system kind of works. So I don't know what the statistics are. I would imagine that if something like that happened and they got complaints from LGBT communities about it, I would hope that they would uphold those complaints.
And then there's, I suppose, the counterpoint of that, where quite often there are a lot of complaints against something that actually promotes LGBT rights, particularly from religious groups.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one because, I mean, when you say about promoting rights, that's great. I don't think, but a lot of people misunderstand the idea of promoting a group's rights to promoting their way of life, which is a different thing.
Well, they have a right to their way of life. That's the point. Then.
Yeah, but promoting someone's rights is a different issue. Some people see it as you promoting their lifestyle. Like if somebody, I mean, what would I say? That some people would see it as you trying to convert people to something.
Should they be taken seriously at all? Because that sounds like some serious bullshit.
I don't think so, but you know, there's all sorts of people out there. There are idiots.
I suppose there's the point of democracy. I mean, in like a complaints system that is partly democratic, I suppose. In democracy, whilst the people there aren't experts on that, it, I guess, is better than having one or a few people deciding on the view of a particular company or broadcasting station based on the views of a few people, if that's wrong, because that means that there's no real power to change that. However, having it more democratic, whilst it sometimes backfires and there are serious consequences there. I mean, the climate change debate is a really good example of how, in my opinion, quite a lot of broadcasting channels have been irresponsible in representing the facts there. Where they usually have it where it's represented as, scientists aren't really sure about it, but they are, for the most part, really sure about it.
Yeah, I don't think serious scientific programs ever claim that. I think it's people who are trying to spin it for other reasons, politicians mainly.
But like the news that most people watch,
do you give a voice to a politician who's clearly lying?
Yeah, a lot of that is, whilst we have our views on what is the right side of many issues, And I think with, I don't know, would you say that there's quite a lot of issues that you're willing to say that the other side, that you're willing to say that you're more in the middle of than on any, that you're more towards ambivalent to, rather than either on one side strongly or the other strongly?
I don't like the idea of there being one side or another. I think it's divisive.
I guess, yeah. But would you say that you're more on the whole kind of centered in that sort of regard?
No, there are some things that I'm clearly... Well, it depends what you mean. I mean, centered to me means in the real world, you know.
But I mean centered on...
I mean, if you're talking about the climate change thing, I'm in the realistic position that there's a good chance we could be extinct in the next 100 years. The extreme of it would be, to one side, the way that the world seems to be treating it, as though it's not as serious as it actually is. And on the other side would be people that think that we're going to die out as a species in the next year.
The extreme of one side is believing that this is all one big conspiracy, and the extreme of our side is believing that we could all die.
No, that's not an... Yeah, but then you're seeing yourself as an extremist.
Well, that's the thing. Extremes aren't necessarily always wrong. Radical problem requires a radical solution.
Then you're putting yourself outside of the Overton window.
Yeah, but sometimes that's necessary to shift it.
Yeah, but it doesn't shift it into the right place, because the Overton window would then be over on one side. You need to envisage more extreme than your own opinion. Like I say, for somebody to claim that that the seas are going to rise and we're going to all die in the next year would be an extreme.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, but not sort of tiptoeing around things and going out there big and bold, saying the truth, but not holding back on it, shifts that Overton... By the way, the Overton window is sort of the political normality of ideas. Shifting that Overton window by saying the truth, but not holding back on it, might actually shift it more to whilst it's not necessarily to the truth, it's to somewhere a lot closer to the truth rather than the absolute opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
We should probably be wrapping up there, but we've made a lot of points of quite a wide
Some
area.
of them had something to do with tribalism.
A lot of them are to do with tribalism, but I get a lot of them are sort of with tribalism that encompasses a lot of issue, because there is a sort of binary applied to a whole host of issues, which means that tribalism applies because that's just sort of how humans... I think we like to divide the world into little sections, so that is just simpler, so that we don't have to consider really complex things all the time, because that's sort of uncomfortable. Anyway,
Zombied out.
I've been Firebolt.
And I
have been... You're spending more time doing this.
I've been the Orbiter. Yeah, I know. I don't want it to be a depressing ending, though. I've been trying to finish for the last 3/4 of an hour, and I don't want it to be depressing because I've put my foot down.
You stopped me from... You've silenced me. And that is...
I know, but I feel like you were trying to make me say something that you could argue with.
No, I was just trying to bring you out of your comfort zone.
Why? My comfort zone is very comfortable.
Well, to force you to say what you actually think on the issue.
And what makes you think I don't?
To sort of test your idea of not calling people things. To sort of test your idea of being nice to people, to try and sort of persuade them.
I didn't say anything about being nice to people.
Or being more persuasive to someone without dissuading them from your side.
It is a problem that needs addressing.
Yeah.
I mean, if there was a way to change Donald Trump wouldn't you want to take it?
But I don't think there is any way to change Donald Trump, but there's a way to change a lot of his supporters.
Yeah.
Anyway, bye.
Bye.
This podcast is part of the After Dark Podcast Network.